This episode of Brains on Games is all about a game that's my current obsession. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald, and I am obsessed with the game that we're going to talk about today. A package came in the mail not too long ago from Kayenta Games with a copy of Obsession and the expansions. This is a game that you can play with teenagers and adults. It plays in between 30 to 90 minutes, and you can play it with between 1 and 4 players, although with the expansion, it brings the player count up to 6 players. Obsession is a strategy game that involves some engine building, and this is a game, it's more complicated than most of the games that I've talked about here on the show. That's why it's more appropriate for teenagers. There's a lot going on here, but it's so well designed and it's so thematic, and that's one of the reasons why I was very excited to talk to you about it today. You'll be able to see on Instagram, I do my unboxings now, I put unboxing pictures up on Instagram, but you've got the rule book, which even has a link that will take you to some videos to teach you how to play the game. It's a pretty big rule book, but things are very clear after you go through it. I think my son and I played it after a single read through, but we did have to flip through it a couple of times as we played just to make sure of some of the rules. You've even got a glossary that explains the terms in the game, so they've really done a bit of hand-holding here because it is kind of a complicated game. It's about a medium-weight strategy game, less complicated than something like Clans of Caledonia, but way more complicated than Plankton Rising. The theme of this game, it's all about each player is playing a Victorian era family who's had a history of hard times. They've been down on their luck, but their fortunes are beginning to look up, and you're working to improve your estate and to improve your reputation in order to attract the attention of some young, wealthy gentry, they call them in the game, Charles and Elizabeth Fairchild. Charles and Elizabeth are 2 cards in the game that you may be able to pull into your deck and invite them to events at your country estate. And they do give you some significant bonuses if you're able to do that. The rulebook has some information about some of the characters, some of the guests that you might see pop up as you're playing the game. And throughout that rulebook, you're going to see some explanations and descriptions of how the game mechanics might play out in a story or in real life. So if your servants are spreading gossip about another family, they explain how that might work. That's one of the reasons why I was excited to talk about this game, because it's not only a strategy game, the theme really does pull you in, so much so that I've seen some websites where they've described games that they've played of Obsession as if they were writing from a character's diary. If you wanted to do some verbal expression, if you wanted to do some creative storytelling, you could write up a description of some of the turns in this game, and it would create, quite an interesting story, I think. Already there's websites that do that, and the rule book makes that pretty simple and easy to do. Each player is going to play a different family, and you've got a little box that holds those initial pieces, your family members and the servants that you start the game with. The box is very well organized because of choices that they made like this. So you've got a fancy little box to keep your pieces in, and those pieces include cards with the family members. Each card has a photo and a little description of who that person is, and then you've got all of the bonuses that go along with it. Each player also will have some cheat sheets to remind them of some of the concepts or the symbols in the game. Let's take a look at the boards that you're going to be using when you play Obsession. There's really 3 boards that you're going to be paying attention to. You can see 2 of them here, but we'll start with the player board, which is a really important one. This is where you're going to keep track of what your servants can do and the upgrades to your country estate. Up here, you can see that there's a number and there's a little counter that can go around the track. That's your reputation counter. You start the game with a reputation of 1. It can hopefully increase as you play the game. Your reputation is going to allow you to invite more and more reputable or wealthy guests to events at your estate. You've got a bit of a cheat sheet right here that tells you the order of play, the things that you can do on your turn Down here, it will remind you of what your special family bonus is. Some families get an additional servant. In the case of the Cavendish family, they get to start with their reputation tracker here at the number 4. As you earn more reputation, once you go around the track, that's when you flip over that number and it will increase by 1. Down here you can see there are spaces for you to put your servants. Your servants are the workers that you're going to be placing in this game. And you begin the game with several of them, although you can hire more as you play. They'll start the game here in this available service section, but as you use them, they'll be expended, they'll need some rest or some time off, and it cycles through at the beginning of each of your turns. Underneath here you can see some small colored rectangles, and this is where you would place your upgrades as you develop your estate. The game includes a separate board to keep track of those improvements, and it gives you reminders of what each one is. So they're color-coded, but this little board is helpful when you're first starting to play the game, but it does mean that you're going to be spreading things out a little bit more than they would be otherwise. And you do begin the game with 1 improvement in each of these sections. And these start the game beneath those different colors on your player board or on that organizer that I showed you. How does a turn work when you're playing Obsession? Well, you start by rotating the service. So if you've used a servant previously on your last turn, that servant is going to move over to the servants' quarters. And if they start on the servants' quarters, they're going to move again, and then they'll be available for you to use in the game. The next thing that you'll need to do is make sure that you advance the round tracker so you can keep track of what turn you're on. And several of the squares on the round tracker have some special event that's going to affect what's happening in the game. And then you would hold an event of some kind. You would take some sort of action. That activity is where the worker placement starts to come in. Another thing the players are going to keep track of are some objectives. Each player starts the game with 5 secret objectives. And as you play round by round, there are certain turns where you'll discard one that you don't think you're going to be able to score at the end of the game, or you might be able to get some additional objectives. There are things like obtaining extra victory points for certain upgrades that you might have in your estate, for example. Really, these objectives are things that require you to plan ahead, but in the game that we played, I found them really, really helpful at the end. They allowed me to take the lead. You'll be working towards your objective at the end of the game, but there's another way that you're going to earn some victory points. You want to attract the attention of Charles and Elizabeth Fairchild, who give you all kinds of bonuses, and you do that on these courtship rounds during the game. They are going to be interested in a different improvement or upgrade every season. So in this case, I've drawn the first card. It says Prestige. And what that means is that when you get to the courtship round, they are going to be most interested in the family who has the most prestige improvements to their country estate. Those are the purple ones, things like the front parlor, which is what you start with, but you might eventually have a music room. And what you do is you look down here. I'll put this right here on the board. Hopefully you can see. Down here in the corner is a number, and that represents the number of victory points you earn at the end of the game for that improvement. But during those courtship rounds, it represents the number of points that you're trying to maximize so that you can invite Charles or Elizabeth to your events in the following season. You're working towards your objectives. You're working towards inviting Charles and Elizabeth to your events. And how does a turn go? How does all of this happen? Well, you start by hosting an event. And at the beginning, you don't have a lot of choices. But say you wanted to go to the bowling green. We'll put the bowling green here. That's the activity that you're going to do. Then you would invite someone to the activity. So the father and the daughter in the Cavendish family are going to do some bowling on the bowling green at their estate, and then you need to provide service. That is where the worker placement comes in. You've got these guests now. They're really family members. They're not really guests, but you've got these guests, and they require some sort of service to have the activity. In this case, your footman has to be present. So you have to have an available footman in order to have an event at the bowling green. Once you've invited guests and you've provided the proper servants, then you can reap the rewards. You can obtain the favors that you're going to get for this event. In this case, you'll earn £300. And the idea there is that you're meeting together on the bowling green, but you're having discussions maybe about investments or about some other kind of opportunity where you can make some money. Each of these rounds is meant to represent several weeks in the game. Then each guest is going to give you some sort of a bonus. In this case, having the father on the board will mean that you'll earn £200, so you get a total of £500 at the end of this turn. And the daughter here, this fleur-de-lis symbol means that you can invite another guest. There are common guests represented by one of these symbols, or you might be able to invite a prestige guest, and that has two of those fleur-de-lis, and they're extra special. They give you lots of extra bonuses. It is a little bit tricky with those common guests because sometimes there are guests that would reduce your reputation or cost you money to have them at your events. You'll have a deck of these kinds of guests, and if you invite a new one, they go right into your discard pile so that when you collect all your guests by passing your turn, they would come back into your active hand. Some of the guests give you victory points, some of the guests remove victory points at the end of the game. Some of the guests require servants if they're going to participate in your event. Often the ladies will require a lady's maid, and you may find yourself needing to hire some additional ladies' maids in order to have the events that you want to have at your estate. Eventually, like I said, you're going to be able to earn opportunities to draw some prestige guests, and those ones give you more victory points. Their bonuses are always positive. There's about 40% of the guests in the common deck that will give you a penalty. In this case, for example, there's -2 victory points and -£100 if you play that card. But the prestige guests are always positive. 3 victory points at the end of the game. You need a lady's maid to play this young lady, and I can't read her name upside down, but you'll earn £300 and 2 reputation and another prestige guest because she has connections and she'll invite other people to your home if she's attended an event there. And that's where I think the game is so interesting, is that you're making these social connections represented by the cards that are in your deck, and you get more and more choices as the game moves along. But in this case, like I said, you'll draw that extra common guest. Everybody goes into the discard pile. Your servant goes into the expended service, and your activity goes back into your organizer here at the bottom of the board. The next thing that you're able to do once you've enjoyed the favors, whatever those favors might be, remember you're getting £500 from that first turn, so you've got these little cardboard coins. They're pretty thick and durable, but this represents £100. A £500 coin is the golden one. And then you can buy from the market. So I'll show you what that market looks like. Now, I recognize that you can't see this whole board. This is the wide one that would go sort of in the center of the table so that everyone can see it. But here is the market where you can buy additional improvements. I've just placed random ones here, and in fact, they are going to begin the game randomly. All of the tiles, those improvement tiles, go into this bag, and you draw them out to fill up this space. But they are clever how they created the market. Like I said, I've just chosen random ones here, but at the beginning, you're only going to have access to very basic improvements. Those are the ones that you could afford anyway. It's a good thing that those improvements are basic at the beginning, because if they were very expensive, no one would be able to buy them, and then everything would just sit there. But this market is pretty clever. Each square on the market becomes more expensive, and sometimes there will be an additional expense if it's a fancy improvement, or maybe it'll be a bit cheaper if it's a less important thing for your estate. After you go through several turns, you begin to move the really basic ones off the board to make room for those fancier improvements again. So anything that comes out that's really basic will start over here on the prestige rating 1, and eventually all of these service ones will wind up over here on the service stack. As you buy these improvements, you can see again, you're building up an engine that's going to give you additional opportunities for different actions in the game. whether it's earning a reputation. This one here is a barn that ensures that your grounds are properly maintained. So when you do an event, you get an additional reputation because your grounds are so fancy, everybody's going to be talking about them. Now, it might look like, based on what I've described here, that everybody's sort of playing a solitaire game. You're building up your estate and you're drafting these tiles, which is really the only form of interaction that I've talked about so far, if you take a tile that another player wants. But there are some other things that you can do to affect the other players. Your butler's room, where you would place your butler to hire additional servants, can either hire 2 servants from the common supply or hire 1 servant away from another player. Another way that you can interact with the other players is through gossip. Some of the guests will spread gossip about another family, or if you have the right improvement in your estate, you can send a servant out to gossip about another family, and then you steal a reputation from them. So they lose 1 reputation and you gain 1. Let's look just again at the round tracker, because there are some special events that occur. So there are these 4 courtship turns where you're not buying anything or holding an event, but you're really just counting up points to see who gets to take Charles or Elizabeth into their deck. The final courtship is one where you can see that there have been 3 previous ones, so you're going to have a total of 4 cards here, and you add up all of the victory points in each of the categories, each of 4 categories. So you might have prestige, service, and sporting, and essentials. So you would add up victory points in all of those areas to see if you get to have them in your hand for the final round. That gives you 8 additional victory points in the game. Oh, another thing I should mention, at the courtship, that is where you discard one of your objective cards. So if you know there's one that you're not going to score, you can discard that. And then when you get to round 6, you get to choose another one. In fact, you pick up 2 more objective cards, and then you continue to discard, so that at the end you're going to have 3. The village fair is an important space. There are a couple of them in the game, but really it's only going to affect you if you've held an activity in your private study where 2 family members are going to gather to plan the village fair. Once you've done that, you flip this over, and at each fair you earn £300 and 2 reputation when those occur. You do have to make a decision there, though, because if you don't use the study to plan the village fair, you've got 3 victory points in hand at the end of the game. If you do, you get 0. When you get to that courtship round, like I said, you count up those victory points and see who's going to earn the attention of Charles or Elizabeth. If you do, you also get one of these victory point cards. That's what this little stack is all about. And they will give you victory points at the end of the game, but if you trade them in early, you get some other bonus. It might be reputation, it might be a guest, in this case, a prestige guest, which would be a good thing to have, but you're trading victory points at the end for that immediate benefit. This game is so much about those executive functions, the planning ahead, keeping track of lots of information in order to work towards lots of goals. You might be working on the courtship, or working on improving your estate, or working towards your objectives. There are lots of different goals that you could work for. Those might change during the game, but executive functions are all about planning and tackling things in an organized way and shifting your strategy if you need to. And that's really important for this game. On the national holiday, reputation no longer matters when you're inviting guests to your events. These prestige guests require a certain reputation here on the chart. This one needs you to have 4 reputation before she'll attend one of your events. They're not just going to attend anything, these prestige guests especially. You have to work your way up towards them. But if it's a holiday, you can invite anybody. Okay, one more thing about the game before we wrap up. Like I said earlier, you're going to be using your servants and sending them over to the expended service side of your board. You discard the guests once they've attended an event, or if you've invited a new guest, they go into your discard pile. Eventually, you're going to have no servants left and no guests left in your hand that you can play. At that point, you can't have any more events. What do you do then? Well, you can spend your round passing your turn instead. If you pass your turn, you've got a cheat sheet here that has some instructions for the options of what you can do if you pass. Instead of holding an event, you reclaim all of your cards from the discard pile and they go in your hand. Now you're ready. All of your guests can be played at an event the next round. Then you refresh service, meaning that all of your servants go from the expended or the servants' quarters and they're available and active. You then would collect £200 from your tenant, so you get a little bit of money if you do that. Or you can choose to refresh the builder's market, meaning that if there's nothing that you want to buy in the builder's market, you can dump all of those tiles and replace them with new ones. Now, with the expansion, you can also choose to hire servants on your turn when you pass. In the base game, that's not an option, but in the expansion it is, because they have extra servants. And it therefore becomes really important to be able to have lots of opportunities to hire those servants. And then you can buy from the builder's market once you've done all of that. So you'll get the extra £200 and then you can start shopping. Or you'll refresh the market, and then if you have some coin, you can start shopping. And that is Obsession in a nutshell. A mid-weight strategy game. Lots of exercise for those executive functioning skills. I want to thank Kayenta Publishing again for sending all of this big package along. I was so excited to receive it. I love this game. And they sent me a note saying their mission is to get families and friends together to have fun. And they definitely accomplished this, for me at least, in this game. And that's a great mission to have, I think. If you have any questions or suggestions for me, you can find me at brian@brainsongames.ca. Brainsongames.ca is the website. That's where future episodes will go, and previous episodes have been posted there too. Brains on Games is the Twitter handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed. And lately I've been posting on Instagram photos of unboxing these packages as I get them. If there's a new game that comes into my house, you'll see pictures of all the components on Instagram. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to be notified of future ones, you can always head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.